Hello guys, this is Reinhart and this video is gonna be worth your time, as I believe my channel is worth your time, guys. This video is gonna be about Unholy Death Knight Area Effect Pressure Master. It'll show you how to effectively dominate and pad the meters, but not only the meters, how to effectively transition from area effect to a single target to area effect, and how mathematically, down to one runic power, maximize a lot of your pressure. On top of it, we're gonna make a scenario guide. When's the best to use the area effect and which sub-talents best to pick for that area effect build. And last but not least, which comms is it good to run with, like DK Warrior or DK Lock, or which comms is it best to use against as well. So, last but not least, guys, I am actually gonna be doing a Q&A vlog next week. For everybody who is interested in participating in it, add me on Facebook and message me the questions that I'm gonna be addressing. Obviously, I'm not gonna address dumbass questions. Alright guys, let's get started. In the beginning, what you need to do is you need to spread the love, my friends. You need to actually outbreak as much as possible and have a lot of targets get hit by your virulent plague so your epidemic can explode on them. Now, this is something I learned from the other game called Rift, is the proper dot usage when you want to coat the entire enemy team into a lot of diseases. So you start with one initial target and then your outbreak is going to spread to 3 different targets. But then what you need to do is you need to pick the opposite end of the enemy team and do the same thing over again. That way your outbreaks are twice as effective because you're picking the most impact area possible. From there, you can easily go and invade the center to spread even more love and more diseases. Now, in this illustration, the placement is not perfect. The placement probably would have been perfect somewhere closer to the center on the both sides. However, that's just a general idea how hitting at 2 different sides of the enemy team will yield the most amount of area effect damage. From outbreak, you're going into the defile to build up your stacks, and about a couple seconds later, once you build up the stacks, you want to use epidemic to explode your diseases with the extra damage added from the defile. I'm gonna slow down here and I'm gonna stretch this episode for you guys to get it. It's a super simple basically idea. You spread as much outbreak as possible, you put the file on the ground. Quite first, I think you can change the rotation and put the file first onto the ground, depending on the enemy placement, and then go for the outbreaks. So while you actually spreading diseases, you're building up stacks. But honestly, it kind of doesn't really matter to some extent. So here, I'm actually spreading a lot of different diseases via outbreak on the different parts of the enemy team. So over here, I am popping the file onto the ground right here. So now that the file is start building me some stacks. Once you got enough of the stacks and you spread a lot of diseases, now it's time for you to explode it via epidemic. And that's where the massive AOE single target damage coming out. Your epidemic crits up to 120,000, which is about 4 to 5% of somebody else's HP. In this battleground, I am not running any enchants or any elixirs or any potions. Just a pure raw damage with a really nice priority rotation and the rotation that I created in this game. And I'm going up against basically another Unholy DK who is running enchants and elixir and all that good stuff. And the end result was pretty impressive. I did 50% more damage than the other DK, doubled his killing blows while having a lot less stats than he did. And here, while I didn't have as many killing blows as the other DK, Unholy DK, he had 7 and I had 4, and we died the same amount of times. I more than doubled, almost tripled his damage. Now, I am not showing you guys this to brag about myself. It's just a random battleground. Nobody really gives a hoot about it. What this is about is to show you the effectiveness of the spec itself and the rotation I was using. Once all your runes are used up and you're sitting at the max runic power, you have 2 different options. Option 1 is transition into single target damage and to finish some targets off, or maximize your area of effect even further. So to transition into single target damage, you have to swap on the target and you have to pump out all your coils until you get Scourge of the World's proc, plus 50% Clawing Shadow damage. Then you're gonna dump all your runes with the Clawing Shadows to maximize your single target pressure. Then you're gonna go back to AOE. Here, for example, I am applying lots of diseases on a lot of different targets, and I'm getting my Doom proc, so I'm dumping all my runic power into this Death Knight, and he gets that Scourge of the World proc, so I actually end up doing a couple Scourge strikes to him as well. For the highest burst, you dump all your runes into Clawing Shadows. For highest sustain, you dump your runes into Clawing Shadows every other Death Coil. So you Death Coil, Clawing Shadows, Death Coil, Clawing Shadows, because Necrosis increases your Clawing Shadows damage by 25% per coil hit on a target. To maximize area effect is actually very simple. You dump 2 death strikes with 1 coil on all your runic power to maximize and increase the chance of getting a runic corruption proc. Why? So mathematics doesn't lie, my friends. Runic corruption has a 1.25% chance per runic power spent to increase rune regeneration by 100%. Max runic power is 115. If you use 3 coils, that means you use up 105 runic power, or your chances 131%, roughly speaking. With 2 death strikes plus a coil, you're gonna use up all your runic power, all 115, and it will give you a chance of 143.75%. For the globals that you use, you have 12.5% chance of proccing your runic corruption more. The more runes you get from runic corruption, the more pandemic outbreaks you can place, the more epidemic you can use, and more defiles you can put out, thus doing infinitely a lot more damage. So let's take a look at the variations of the specs for arena setting itself, because this spec will work in arenas if you actually spec correctly. Against the melee comps that actually like to stack on each other, you can pretty much run almost the same spec with the epidemic defile combination, debilitating infestation if nobody's dispelling your diseases, and if they do, then you can spec out of Unholy mutation for reanimation probably, and actually go into debilitating infestation itself, especially if you need to peel for your healers and so on and so forth. This variation is basically against a ranged, melee, or double ranged. When you know that the enemy team is not going to stack as much, you want to utilize that path. You want to utilize your path to the biggest potential. So what you do is you actually go with infected class, that your path class proc a different, they proc first of all different debuffs, but it's not the case. It procs with a 35% chance to, okay, please do, to proc a festering wound. And the more festering wounds your pet is gonna proc, the more runes back you're gonna get from the pestilent pustules. Basically every 4 festering wounds that you burst, you get 1 rune. The more runes you get from that, the more runic power you get. The more runic power you get, the more energy you give to your pet to stack up more festering wounds. It's pretty phenomenal. So that's what I would use to actually maximize and center your damage around the Clawing Shadows, while you still have the option to do a pandemic and to use Unholy mutation for snares combination, and utilize Asphyxiate and Dark Arbiter for that nasty single target burst. The alteration to the other spec that I would make, I would actually go with the Wandering Plague instead of Pandemic. So Wandering Plague will get the job done. On average, it jumps 3 times, it'll do about 180,000 damage in 24 seconds, which is not much. But it will infect everybody with your Virulent Plague. However, because you're gonna save those runes from Pandemic, then you can put those runes into Clawing Shadows, into Pestilence Pustules. Basically, again, going with a Festering Strike, Clawing Shadows, that kind of a grind rotation. But this is more already a single target oriented spec on its own, and it will require the separate guide that I'll make later on. Last but not least, what to use, when to use, how to use. On average, sparring is actually a very useful talent against the melee cleaves. The melees are gonna rush you and gonna try to pretty much mongoloid the fuck out of you. Against the casters, if your healer cannot keep you up, if you're playing against like Fire Mage Boomkin, which have really good bursts right now, you might want to go with the Cadaverous Pallor. Otherwise, I would recommend either Dark Simulacrum or Anti-Magic Zone, depending on what. If you want to go more offensive, you want to steal that CC, go with the Dark Simulacrum. Also, keep in mind that it also depends. Against the mages, you don't want to go with the Dark Simulacrum, you want to go with AMZ. Why? Because your Virulent Plague will break those polymorphs. A good smart player will pretty much go back to his healer while he's in the polymorph from your Dark Simulacrum and stand there with a Virulent Plague on him, so he'll proc, do spread pressure damage and get the enemy healer out of the polymorph range. So therefore you want to go with anti-magic zones. Against a pure melee physical DPS, you want to go with the Dark Simulacrum here. Why? Because if the healer does the Hodges, if the healer perhaps the bubbles or anything else like that, that you want to steal something from the healer, Dark Simulacrum is very useful. Against the melee cleaves, you want to go the Heartstop Aura. Arms Warriors are gonna freaking hate you for the Heartstop Aura, because having their charges on the 30% plus cooldown, having their Mortal Strike with the 30% plus cooldown will hamper the damage by a lot. Against the caster cleaves, where you don't really have much of an uptime, I would recommend going with Necrotic Aura. Simply because when you don't have enough uptime, technically speaking, 8% damage done is almost kind of like a reduction of 8% max HP, but there's no stacks that you need to worry about. And if your team is very on offensive and you don't worry about too much against the melee, or let's say against the melees that you play against, like for example rogues or pharaohs, who don't really have much of a cooldown based game, as much as they have their abilities just spawnable and they depend on energy. Good example, Mortal Strike has a cooldown, let's say Backstab does not. So Heartstop Aura value kind of diminishes there, so you want to go with the Decomposing Aura here, because you want to lose up some of that HP stacks. Also, the Decomposing Aura is really important when it comes to class synergy with a couple other classes that I'm going to explain you in just a moment. Here, against the melee cliffs, Debilitating Infestation is actually very good. To peeling against the warriors, to peel against the enemy warriors, you might want to go with the Sludge Belcher and the Necrozas, technically speaking. Some of the top comps that I think are going to work with this AOE burst kind of a spec is going to be Shadow Cleave, obviously, Walking Dead, TSG, Zombie Cleave, 2.5 Hero Cleave, which kind of hilarious. Basically, Death Knight and Demon Hunter are 2 heroes, and the healer is kind of a half, so 2.5 Hero Cleaves, because Demon Hunters do a lot of AOE burst. Here is an example of the arena of this spec itself. So in this arena, it's a 3v3 pretty much skirmish, because I'm still on beta as I'm making this guide. I decided to go with the Pestilence Spew Styles as a spec itself, still roll with the Pandemic for lots and lots of AoE bursts, go with Asphyxiate whenever I actually need it, and basically just try to peel and rot the enemy team as much as possible. I'm gonna fast forward because it's kind of a boring ass video. With the rogue, I told the rogue to just sit on the healer so that he will fall behind the healing while I'm spamming and just cleaving the shit out of the enemy team. And here I use Asphyxiate, I use Death Grips to peel as much as possible, to peel Feral away from my healer. However, the rogue did swap at targets quite a lot, but if you notice, their healers started going and more as we get into the fight. And the targets that I'm not even focusing on are still dying, like Warlock, like pretty much Mistweaver. And at some point in time, we decided to do a bit of a hard swap to the Mistweaver itself. And the Mistweaver having really hard time tapping everybody off, which I actually enjoy. Now, if I would have played this with Affliction Lock, Shadow Priest, or Warrior, where we would be just trucking the shit out of damage, then it would have been so much better. Now here, if you guys can take a look, I did more damage than both of the enemies combined. And I did quadruple my rogue's damage. Now imagine on top of my 40 million damage, if there was a lock with a 30 million damage who could CC the healer, who could actually lock him out a little bit more. Or if that rogue that I played with would have locked out the enemy healer as much as possible. Like I said, I hope this video was worth your time, my friends. Please check out my philosophy channel, where we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff like how to be a better parent, how to gain more out of your workouts, how to get into better shape, how about the politics, and just the whole social infrastructure of us as a human beings. Check out it, it's gonna be the first link down below, and add me on the Facebook as your friend. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a great day. And check out my Legion macros video.